Most people think Lake Powell is simply getting smaller, but that's not what's worrying experts. What's worrying them is what happens when the water falls below certain levels. Because once that happens, the consequences don't just affect the lake, they can affect millions of people who depend on it. Lake Powell is one of the largest reservoirs in the United States. It stores water, generates electricity, and helps support communities across the American Southwest. But year after year, the water has been dropping. And every time it falls a little lower, an important question becomes harder to ignore. How close is Lake Powell to a level it was never meant to reach? And what happens if it gets there? When people think about America's water crisis, they usually think about drought, less rain, hotter temperatures, dry landscapes. But Lake Powell's story is much bigger than that. Created by the Glen Canyon Dam on the Colorado River, Lake Powell became one of the most important reservoirs in the country. For decades, it seemed almost impossible that a lake this massive could face serious trouble. Then the water started falling, year after year. And what looked like a temporary problem slowly became a long-term challenge. Lake Powell doesn't just store water. It also generates electricity. Hydropower relies on water pressure. The lower the water gets, the harder it becomes to generate power efficiently. A reservoir designed to provide both water and electricity suddenly begins struggling to do both. And that's when people started paying closer attention. Because Lake Powell isn't an isolated lake in the middle of nowhere. It's part of a system that supports millions of people. If Lake Powell suddenly stops supplying water to your area, how long do you think your community could adapt? Let me know in the comments. For years, officials have searched for solutions. Water conservation programs, usage restrictions, emergency agreements between states, and to be fair, some of these efforts have helped. The situation isn't hopeless. In some years, conservation efforts have slowed the decline and helped stabilize conditions. But the challenge hasn't disappeared, because demand continues to grow, and the Colorado River system remains under pressure. The real concern isn't whether Lake Powell has enough water today, it's whether it will have enough water tomorrow, or 10 years from now, because every drop matters, and every year matters. The decisions being made right now could shape the future of the American Southwest for generations. Do you think water shortages will become one of the biggest challenges of the future? Comment yes or no and tell me why. The good news is that Lake Powell isn't empty, and scientists, engineers, and water managers continue working to protect the system. New technologies, better conservation, smarter water management, all of these can help. But time may be one thing they can't create more of. What do you think is the biggest threat to Lake Powell? Drought, population growth, or water consumption? Let me know in the comments. Because while Lake Powell still holds billions of gallons of water today, the question isn't how much water's left. The question is how much time remains before the next critical threshold is reached.